right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to What's the Rate, the resource series. I'm your host, Breon Lyons, and today I am so excited for this episode because I know it's going to help a lot of artists out there. Today, we'll jump right into it. I have Marcie Cleary. Marcie Cleary is a partner in the entertainment group at Frankfurt, Kernick, Klein & Sells, where she advises clients across film, television, digital media, and publishing. She handles the structuring and negotiation of a wide range of entertainment agreements for both individuals and companies. Her clients include actors, journalists, writers, directors, producers, authors, podcasters, and digital creators. She has substantial experience representing comedians in connection with stand-up specials, television and streaming projects, feature films, and recorded albums. She is also widely regarded as a leading attorney in the podcast space. Marcie is consistently recognized as a top entertainment attorney in the United States. In the Hollywood Reporter's 2025 Power List of the top 33 attorneys for A-list athletes, teams, and leagues. Variety has featured her in its Dealmakers Impact Reports, its Legal Impact Reports for 6 straight years, and its Women's Impact Report, New York. Chambers USA recognized her in its Guides for Entertainment and Media Advisory work, and she has done much, much more. Truly a powerhouse, and I am so honored to have her here on this show. Thank you so much for coming on, Marcie.
Thank you for having me. I was excited to be invited.
Yes, thank you so much. So we have a couple topics and a couple questions that we're going to go over. But I just want to dive right into some of the things that you think are very important for every indie artist or entertainer to have to protect themselves, especially coming straight out of college.
If you say the top 3 things, I would say number 1, a lawyer, number 2, a lawyer, and number 3, a lawyer. I think, why I say that is I think the best thing you can do to protect yourself is to have a contract. I say you even need contracts with your friends. When you're putting projects together and collaborating and doing short films together, or you want to write a script together, you should have a contract. And really what that is just an agreement on terms. Who owns the project? What happens if you break up and don't work together anymore? Who takes the project with them? Or does the project just die? How does the money work? Who has approval of what happens to this project? And who has creative approvals? Who has business approvals? So I would say the biggest thing you need is to figure out an agreement with the folks you're working with, the people hiring you, if that's the situation. And maybe if you're right out of college, you don't have the money for a lawyer. You don't know a lawyer, And let's talk about that too, about like how much lawyers cost and can you actually get a lawyer? But at the very least, make sure you know what your agreement is with the people you're working with, even if it's over email. It doesn't have to be a formal contract, but really the contract just forces you to ask these questions that you really should figure out before you start working with somebody.
Yeah. Especially with friends, it gets really tricky, or just like people that...
That's the trickiest.
Yeah. Because there's falling outs that have happened with friends due to that specifically,
And what happens, you usually fall out when you're successful, because once you're making a lot of money and getting a lot of attention, then you start realizing, do you want the same things? Are you going in the same direction? So if you figured all that out before the success, okay, this is how this is going to work, it actually helps keep the relationship.
Yeah. Initially, upon graduating college, what are some of the resources or tools that artists can get familiar with early that will be beneficial to know throughout the journey of their career?
Okay, so I would say start with focusing on your art. That is huge. Don't worry about the business right away. Make sure you have something that's refined, that's sellable, that's marketable. Really focus on being the best you can be. Okay, once you've done that, it is good for you to be familiar with the business of the industry. And so some of the resources are easy for you to get. Deadline is a website that gives you, it's really like TMZ, little short blogs. It just gives you the gossip on what's happening in the business, what companies are selling, who's being hired. So that's something easy you can search every day just to see what's going on, what shows are being made. Also, there's Variety magazine, Hollywood Reporter. They're all digital online. And so those are very good resources for you to just see what's going on. The Sports Business Journal is actually really good. It tells you, again, who's buying and selling, what's popular. And so that really gives you a taste of the business. And then also, you do need to build a team, right? You are going to want to get representation, an agent, a manager, a lawyer. resources there for finding a lawyer, specifically for people of color. There's a resource called Diverse Representation, and it is a directory of people of color who are publicists, attorneys, managers, agents. They also host events where they teach you about different industries and how you can get involved. So that's a great place to start. There's also Volunteer Lawyer of the Arts. So those are volunteer lawyers who work at different firms and just work for Volunteer Lawyer of the Arts. We call it VLA for short. VLA is a great resource if you need somebody to look at something. Like that's a place you could go for legal help.
So what are some good things that you would say are good to look for in a contract? What does it need to include in order to guarantee a healthy and honest foundation between the artist and the rep, the artist and the label, or even between friends that are working together and collaborating?
Yeah, I would say first, you need to understand the contract that you sign. I think that's the biggest mistake that young creators make is they just sign it. I call them happy to be there deals, where you're happy to be there. So you sign, I was saying about your podcast. I said, anybody on your podcast should be happy to be here. That's a happy to be there deal. What's great about lawyers is we're not happy to be there. We don't care. We're not emotionally tied to the project. So we really evaluate it. And it's like, okay, no, you can't agree to that. I know you're happy to be there, but these are things you should consider. And I would say the main things to understand ownership is huge, right? So the script you write, if you sell it to the studio, do you still own it or not, right? Like you need to know that. Also, the term and the length of the agreement. Mm-hmm. For example, it may say on there, let's say that you're getting hired to create content for a brand. When does that contract end? Are you going to be working under those same terms forever or for a certain period of time? That's a big thing. Exclusivity is a big thing that you should look at. There are terms in the contracts where it'll say, if you're working for me, you won't work for my competitor. Well, what is your competitor, right? There could be new companies coming in the future. Are you barred from working for them, right? So exclusivity is something you have to be careful too. And it'll just be one word. It'll say, you are rendering exclusive services to me. And that means you're not working for anybody else. So that you have to be very careful of. And then that's what you can look at just as a creator. As lawyers, we also look at indemnities and insurance. And that's more a legal concept. But if you see indemnity and insurance, you're like, maybe I should get a lawyer to look at it because those are legal protections if there are any claims. So like if somebody sues the project, somebody trips and falls on set, right? And they say, hey, I'm suing everybody who was here, including you. The production is supposed to cover that claim for you, right? They're supposed to defend you. That you are not supposed to have to pay out of your pocket to cover it. And that's what an indemnity does. An insurance, if they have insurance for the project, if there is a claim, somebody will pay for it, right? So that's what we look for. I don't expect you as a non-lawyer to understand all those terms, but those big ones, ownership, the term, exclusivity, you're going to care about that. And then actors care about their trailers. That is important. Are you going to be comfortable on set? Are you going to have a private dressing area? Things like that. Credit is so important for us too as lawyers to make sure you're credited on the project. They use your work, even if they own the work, which is typical. You should at least get a credit. Right. You see it so much. That's why you need a lawyer.
Yeah.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
I could go on and on of all the things you got to care about. And that's why I go back to, you should really have a lawyer look at it.
Yeah. So may I ask you this? We're going a little bit off script, but the word perpetuity, I really want to get into that word. So any advice or just insight on that word?
Yeah. I would say, so in perpetuity means forever. That's it. Not unusual, but it's in the context of what you're doing, right? So I'll give an example. If you are an influencer and you're going to post on social media for a brand, how long can they use the content that you give them? Is it in perpetuity? And then I say, are they paying in perpetuity money to you? That's how you can decide. Yeah. Typically, you want a usage period. Hey, you can use this for a year. You use it for 2 years, 10 years. As the dollar sign goes up, they can use it longer. But that's something you want to be paying attention to because also you are not the same person 3 years from now that you are now. So maybe you don't want them to be circulating that advertisement. Another thing is where they can use the work. Again, I'll use influencers and social media. Let's say you do a post. Well, where can they use the content you give them? Can they use it in store and like literally at a cashier, a big old post up sign where you're like a supermodel for them? Are they paying for that? Or is it just on social media, just on their publicity? You know, you really got to pay attention to that. A lot of creators don't realize that contracts are negotiable. The smallest things are negotiable. For example, if they said, we want you to be on set for 6 hours, you can say, hey, for this commercial, I only want to be there for 4 hours. Or they say, we want you to do 4 posts. You could say, no, let's only do 2. Or they want you to be on all social media platforms. You say, no, let's just focus on these few, right? I think that is the main thing, is people think they're not negotiable and that folks won't take comments. Even if they give you a contract and say, no, we don't accept changes, I bet if you say, but what about this, right? I bet they'll make that change. And that's what creators don't know, is that you should just ask for what you want. I would say the second thing is, if something in the contract or in the agreement doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean that you're not smart or that because I don't have a legal education, I don't understand this. No, it probably doesn't make sense. And so you should ask the questions. That is the biggest thing. I'll say, hey, they say it's not negotiable, but I do have a few questions, like, well, what does this mean? And why would I agree to this if you're paying me this much, or agree to this somewhere else, So I would say asking questions is so important. And then I would say the third thing that is a legal term that people don't understand is the length of the agreement. And a lot of people think the longer the agreement, the better, because you feel secure, right? So how these agreements will work for studios, like for an actor, for example, it'll say it is a 6-year deal. The first year of the deal, we're hiring you for, and you're guaranteed that year. But then the additional 5 years are at our option. So you read it and you say, oh, great. Yeah, give them a million options. No, because the length of the term is how long you go before you can renegotiate. So the shorter the term, the better. So if somebody offers you a 6-year deal, if it's not guaranteed, if it's just options, which usually always is, you'll say no. Like if it's at your option, it's not a mutual option, it's usually at their discretion whether or not they continue. You want to say, hey, let's make this a short agreement, 1 year, 2 years, because then if they want you back, which they probably will, they'll renegotiate.
Okay. I love it. I'm already learning so much, so I really appreciate it. So now I just want to get into some of the topics that we have. What are some of the best ways to find a good entertainment lawyer?
Yeah,
I know you had some of the resources at the beginning, but...
Yeah. I would say really the number one best way is to ask a friend who has a lawyer. Ask them who they like. They may not even recommend their lawyer. They may say, hey, I use this person, but I heard this other person is good. So I would say ask your friends who are in the industry who have lawyers. That's the best recommendation, because they'll tell you if they're good or not. Okay, say you don't have any friends in the industry. How do you just find out on your own? Volunteer Lawyer for the Arts, nonprofit volunteer organization. You apply, and there's a process, but they have volunteer lawyers who will assist. Also, law school clinics, right? We're in New York. There's NYU, there's Columbia, there's Brooklyn. There's tons of law schools here. They have clinics where they actually do pro bono work, those law school students. So that's something to look into. And then last, and this is the biggest secret and the trick, you'd be surprised how many lawyers would take a phone call with you and just give you a consultation and advice. So you can look, on all those lists I'm on, Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Chambers, you can call those lawyers up and you can say, hey, I have this going on. Could you help me? I'll tell you, I would say 7 to 8 times out of 10, they will pick up the phone, they will email you back, and they will talk to you to figure out what you need, or refer them to one of your colleagues. So I would say you also just look at those lists, reach out to them. If that lawyer themselves can't help you, they are at law firms where somebody probably can.
Yeah, because sometimes it's not even needing a full service, but just like being pointed in the right direction of where to go, or even just scaling the severity of the situation that you're in.
That's right.
So that's really good to know. Contract clarity if you have no legal training.
I think that's funny because it's kind of like asking, how do you read an x-ray if you haven't been to med school?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you could try if you want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know. I could look at it and see a little break. I don't know what that means. You know, it's the same thing. It's you probably don't have that much clarity without legal training. But I would say ask questions. I would say that is like the biggest theme is people who present a contract to you. They understand if you don't, if you have questions, for sure, they want you to understand it before you sign it. And so I would say, the first is just everybody acts like they can understand contracts, or they say, oh, I put it through ChatGPT. And that's like, literally think about a doctor. Like, oh, yeah, I put my x-ray through ChatGPT, so I think I know how to treat this. No, you don't, And that's okay. But I would just say, this sounds like an advertisement for lawyers, and it is really, because you need the help. But also, like, we're here to give you this advice.
Yeah. I just want to circle back to a term that you use, pro bono. Can you just break that down and clarify
It means
that?
free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Pro bono means free legal services. And lawyers are required to provide pro bono services as part of our ethical duty. That's what I'm saying. You can go to law firms and ask. Now, for artists, it's different because pro bono is typically for indigent folks, right? And like, do you qualify for that? Just because you chose a career where you're not making a lot of money, does that mean you qualify for pro bono services? Not necessarily. But let's talk about how you could afford lawyers. And I think this is what a lot of people don't know about entertainment lawyers in particular, is we work on either a percentage basis or hourly. Percentage means typically most entertainment lawyers, they commission 5% of the deals we work on. So we negotiate a deal for you and you're paid $100, right? We get paid $5. But what's great about that is 5% of zero is zero, right? And so if you're not getting paid, you don't pay anything. But lawyers work with you and bring you on because they really see it as an investment. And they said, hey, you're not getting paid on this, but you're going to get a big deal that I'll work on that I'll get 5% on, and they'll cover it. So most people do engage in entertainment lawyers on that 5% basis. But then also we work hourly because there's got to be something for us to take a percentage of. So for example, we talked about the collaboration agreement with the friends. Nobody's getting paid. So those are typically hourly. And what you should do, and this is a very big point for creators, you need to have a legal budget. When you do a budget for your project and you do on screen, you do hair and makeup, but there's no legal line item in it, that's a huge mistake. Like, you should be putting enough money in there, about 5% of the budget, as a line item for legal services. And then you go to lawyers and say, hey, here's my legal budget. Could you help me? And if they can't, I'm sure they can refer you to a lawyer who can.
Getting signed, things to know and things to avoid.
Okay. So here is important to know the difference between a lawyer, an agent, and a manager. Everybody asks that. So I'll start with an agent. An agent, their job is to procure opportunities for you. So that means go get you work, right? So you watch shows like Entourage back in the day, and the agent is running around screaming on the phone, trying to get his client in a movie. That's an agent. That's what an agent does. A manager is more of a creative partner. They actually produce with you. Like, they're the ones who read your script. They creatively say, okay, this is good or not that good. They help you find producers and actors and writers. They really are in the trenches with you. And a lawyer comes on board when you have a deal to negotiate or intellectual property to protect, right? And so the lawyer is actually, once the agent and manager has done their jobs, then you call the lawyer, say, hey, we have an offer on the table. I would say what's unique about entertainment lawyers is we're also business advisors. We're business lawyers as much as we are contract lawyers, because we negotiate the money for you. We negotiate the length of the agreement. We negotiate your trailer, what your credit will be. Like, really giving advice on, like, okay, based on what the market is and our precedent with other studios, this is what you should be getting paid. So lawyers are crucial. But they come when there is a deal to be made, right? With your friends or with the studio, that's when you go to them. The other thing about a lawyer is it's a unique relationship because of attorney-client privilege. I always say, if you get in trouble, call me first. Don't call that manager and agent. We also, everything we say, our conversations are privileged, right? Confidentiality. You'll tell me things you won't tell other people. And I would say also, we're counselors. Like, we give advice. We talk about strategy. We talk you off the ledge all the time. It's like I'm a part-time therapist. But that's what a good lawyer does.
So now let's talk about how to get out of contracts if need be and how to avoid also ruining any relationships.
Sure. Okay, I always say this, slavery is dead. Okay, so you do not have to do anything you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. But there's usually a cost to it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you have to navigate. So you can say, hey, I'm done with this show. I don't want to work on it anymore. Okay, nobody's going to force you to be there. But then you may have to pay back all the money you were advanced, right? You may have to pay for the cost it was to just end this production in the middle. So you don't want to be emotional about it. Mm-hmm. You want, even though the emotion is always going to drive your decision, that's just how it works. But the way you handle it is very logical and practical. And really, you also have to remember that everybody's a person. You know, even these studios are run by people. Everybody has feelings, you know. Mm-hmm. And so as mad as you may be, you know, that person gonna be mad too, you know? And so how do you figure it out so you end it happy? Because also nobody wants to work with somebody who's not happy. You know, like I don't want to be in a contract with you if you're miserable, you know? So always know that and know you don't have to be anywhere you don't want to be, but you have to do it in a way that makes sense for everybody. And so maybe let's say you want to end a show. Okay, well, tell them middle of the season, but we don't end it to the end of the season. You know, like the end of the season, hey, we're not going to do all those options or those additional years on the contract. But also that's a point of like, that's what something lawyers look at is termination and like being able to end relationships. Like that termination provision in that contract probably was negotiable and you could figure out more flexibility.
All right. So best ways to defend / protect yourself when bound to an NDA.
That question is so funny to me. Don't talk. If you signed a NDA, if you signed it, they had you sign it for a reason. Mm-hmm. NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. So you're agreeing not to disclose anything. And you get them in all types of contexts. If you're getting hired as a housekeeper, as a nanny, as a writer for a company, you know, because basically they don't want their confidential business to be spread, you know, without their approval. So the best advice is to, one, don't sign the NDA until you understand it and agree with it. And if you do have to sign it, know what you signed. You know, actually read it and say, okay, I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to do that. And then you can govern yourself accordingly.
Yeah. And this not at all, like my intention with that question is not to be like, to double back on someone wishing for their information to stay confidential. Not at all. Not for any type of ill purpose. But I'm just saying, like, if there's a situation where you had signed an NDA, but something happens where you have to protect yourself or you need to speak the truth about something. Right. And it does require some of that information.
Well, that's more complicated, right? Because NDAs can't be used to protect a crime, right? Okay. And so, again, talk to a lawyer before you do it, you know, because you want them to review it and they'll know whether or not, you know, the information you have supersedes the terms of that contract you signed, the NDA you signed. Mm-hmm. And so don't just go willy-nilly and say, hey, I'm going to go talk because I think this is outrageous. You should, again, consult with the lawyer to say, hey, this is what happened. Can I talk? And they'll tell you how to do it right.
Well, now I kind of just want to get into some of these like habits and practices or any advice that you have for young artists, specifically in their 20s post-grad, in addition to getting a lawyer, you know, but just like business literacy, legal literacy, and things like that.
Yeah, I would say take risks. Now, that's funny. That contradicts everything I said before, you know, where I said, be button up. I would say take creative and artistic risks, but do it in a smart and responsible way, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have at my law firm a vetting lawyer. And what she does is she reviews materials. Like she'll look at cuts of documentaries. She'll look at cuts of videos. She'll listen to podcasts and she'll say, okay, this is an issue. You know, we should take this out. Or she'll look at it and she'll say, oh, did you clear? Did you have a release from this person? And she'll send you back. But what she does is she figures out a way to say yes, not no, you know, and how to do it so that you're covered. And so I would say be daring, be bold, like, you know, express yourself, but also be responsible about it and smart about it. And don't say, oh, it's my art, like I'm protected. Other people are protected too, right? And you've got to navigate that. And so that's why I would say is, you know, be creative. You know, that was the first thing I said, like focus on your art. That's what you should do when you finish school. But also be smart about it and have advisors who've been in the business, you know, and can say, hey, that's something you should look out for. Really seek those mentors who can give you advice. Older producers, more senior actors, folks who can say, hey, I've experienced this, what you should do. So you should always kind of look ahead and figure out how to take those risks and protect yourself.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And look up Marcie Cleary. All of her social media is Marcie Cleary. I will link all of that in the description. And if you need any legal or business, entertainment, law advice, I highly recommend you reach out to her. I'm going to make sure all of the resources that she had listed are in the description, so that way you guys can check them out. And thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Resources. I'm your host, Breon Lyons, and I will see you on the next episode.